What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here and back to review Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die, the new sci-fi comedy starring Sam Rockwell and directed by Gore Verbinski, who's making his return to filmmaking after a nearly decade-long absence, but we'll get to those details in a bit. But first, the movie. Let me admit my bias. No matter what my personal feelings might be about the movie, I want it to be wildly successful. I want it to make all the money in the world because it falls into a category of filmmaking that is truly an endangered species. It's an original movie, not based on any pre-existing IP. It's R-rated. It's a comedy. And it has a very modest budget, in spite of being directed by a man who could very easily be making big-budget, bland, forgettable franchise movies for Disney, like he has many times in the past, but now instead, he's trying to make something fresh with a point of view, with some personality and some style, and I think for many, it's going to be a genuine crowd pleaser. I saw it at the AMC Theater in Times Square last night, and I'd estimate about half my crowd was loudly cracking up and applauding throughout the movie. So in short, I'm rooting all the way for the movie to succeed, because if it does, more original R-rated movies that aren't fucking remakes or franchise extensions will get made in the future. But as far as my personal reaction and personal feelings go about the movie, I'll say this. I laughed really hard on a few occasions, but overall, I was pretty much 50-50 on the movie. For every individual scene or ingredient that I liked, there would be yet another that felt clumsy or silly or outright stupid and obvious, all of which I'll get to shortly. But to start, let's tackle first the premise. A man from the future arrives at a diner in Los Angeles where he must recruit the precise combination of disgruntled patrons to join him on a one-night quest to save the world from the terminal threat of a rogue artificial intelligence.
I come from a future which is totally and completely fucked. And I'm here to set it right.
Are any of you even listening to me?
And if you're thinking to yourself, wait a second, it sounds like they took a lot of ingredients from the Terminator franchise and the Matrix franchise and kind of stirred them together, you wouldn't be wrong. However, this movie has a much more satirical angle to it, a little bit like Terry Gilliam on A Bad Day. It's not remotely on the level of something like Brazil back in the 1980s, but it's at least making the attempt. And what I'll add is that the movie employs an interesting structure where after Sam Rockwell kind of puts together his team from the patrons at this diner, periodically the movie will cut away from the action and give us a little flashback of one of the characters. And within those flashbacks, we get to watch as one member of the group has to wrestle with some hideous manifestation of the AI that's at the core of the movie. And we get to see all the present-day warning signs of how this new AI is quickly undermining, eroding, destroying, and ultimately controlling every aspect of modern life. So big picture, the movie's basically a satirical sci-fi adventure comedy where sprinkled throughout to kind of break up the action, you get the occasional episode of Black Mirror thrown in for good measure. And I should add that the screenplay was written by Matthew Robinson, who appears to be using the screenplay as an opportunity to basically rant and rave about all of his frustrations and his hostility toward the many ways in which our society suffers from an over-reliance on technology that's basically turning us all into mindless zombies with no taste, no intelligence, no analytical skills, no attention span, and ultimately no individuality. And that technology comes in many forms throughout the movie, from excessive cell phone use to virtual reality to video games or even AI-prompted ads, where if you're using AI technology, you're subjected to ads over the course of the experience.
You look homeless, bro. Fuck you too. I come from a nightmare apocalypse. This is the height of fucking fashion.
And I'll admit that I share a lot of the frustrations expressed by Matthew Robinson in the screenplay. Like on any given day when I log into X, I'll see people ranting and raving about some stupid clip generated by AI, talking about how it's better than like the original movie. Like I saw a clip today where RoboCop and Terminator were fighting each other, and the choreography was bland. It looked like shit. It basically looked like every other clip that I've ever seen generated by AI, and like, oh my God, Hollywood's so over. Like, maybe Hollywood is over because Hollywood will slowly start to embrace the very same technology that is trying to replace it, but AI content is precisely that. It is content. You watch it, you forget about it 5 seconds later, and you move on with your life. It is completely, totally disposable, whereas Terminator and RoboCop, they've been around for decades, and people still love those movies and continue to discover those movies. Those movies are movies. They are storytelling. They are art. And I feel like there are a lot of people today who don't quite know the difference between storytelling of lasting and enduring appeal versus AI-generated content, which people just crap out and then forget about. It's almost like they can't understand why they love what they love and the creativity at play. And so when they see AI using recognizable characters, it's just like, gorillas that like pulling feces out of their own ass, like, this is good because it's got the Terminator in it. It's like, anyway, if like me or like Matthew Robinson, you're kind of throwing up your hands in despair at AI movie clips, well then this very well might be the movie for you. And as I was watching the movie last night, I definitely appreciated how Gore Verbinski is giving us like a bit of a throwback experience. Like he shot the movie on actual sets with actual props, using the lights and living, breathing actors. And the movie at least attempts to have its own individual style and its own individual look. An approach that's very elusive to the filmmakers behind the interchangeable big budget movies of the modern age. But with all these nice things that I'm saying about the movie, you might be wondering, how come I'm so ambivalent about it, where I'm basically endorsing what it represents without actually endorsing the movie itself? And I think, without going into spoilers, I think my main problem with the movie is that because it's constantly switching gears in terms of the tone of the movie, sometimes it's satirical, sometimes it's heartfelt, sometimes it's more like a cautionary tale, but because the tone is constantly changing, the actors always seem a little bit lost in terms of what movie are they actually making. Where you'll have a bunch of actors standing around a scene where they all seem to be making a different movie or taking it in different directions. And Sam Rockwell, as the star of the movie, thankfully because he's got a lot of star power and a lot of charisma, oftentimes just through pure raw talent, he's able to kind of bulldoze his way through the movie, where even though the movie might have stylistic or tonal inconsistencies, because he's consistent, he's able to kind of carry the movie on his shoulders. However, the movie also has a lot of flashbacks where he's nowhere to be found, and because a lot of these actors seem a little bit lost or a little bit confused about which direction the movie's going, the movie constantly feels like it's on the verge of coming totally unraveled into complete and total nonsense. And I would argue that it does during the climax, where, how can I say this without going into spoilers? During the climax of the movie, where we get the basically the big exposition dump from the big bad of the movie, it almost feels like the filmmakers got together one night and decided to rewatch The Matrix Reloaded. And when they got to that final scene where the old man's doing the big giant exposition dump and taking the movie into realms of stupidity that we had not anticipated, it feels like the filmmakers, for Good Luck, Have Fun, and Don't Die, said, you know what? Hold my beer. We can go one better. And yeah, I don't know if I should offer any spoilers or not. In any case, for me at least, during the climax to Good Luck, Have Fun, and Don't Die, thanks to one really horrible casting decision, for me the climax comes totally unspooled, totally unglued. And then, I was about to say a compliment, but I can't say a compliment without going slightly into spoiler territory. So let's just say that the movie redeems itself before the very end, but the big final scene, the big showcase of the movie, that for me didn't work whatsoever. But you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to say it anyway. So this is my spoiler warning. If you don't want any clues or tidbits or info on the movie ahead of time, bail out now. 3, 2, 1, blah, blah, blah. But in general, with just about any movie that's ever been made, one of the best ways to ruin your movie is to hire a really annoying kid for a really key, important role. And in the case of this movie, that is precisely what they did. Because you had this incredible cast of characters in this movie with a lot of really good actors, but for the, basically like the mouthpiece for, or the personification of the AI at the core of this movie, like basically the main enemy in this movie, they hired a really stupid, annoying kid who proceeds to give us one giant exposition dump after another, and it completely and totally ruined the movie for me, where I was just rolling my eyes and praying for the movie to end as quickly as humanly possible, because the movie's already a little overly long. It's 2 hours and 14 minutes. My advice to Gore Verbinski would have been, this is your big comeback movie after a decade away from the movie biz. Make a 90-minute movie. This movie easily could have been made with like an hour 30, hour 40-minute runtime. But I think if this movie runs into any obstacles of any kind, it'll be because it overstays its welcome quite a bit. And another big reason the ending doesn't work for me is that the ending tonally completely abandons the humor and the satire that kind of got us up to this point. And suddenly we're expected to take the movie seriously as like a hardcore dystopian sci-fi cautionary tale. And if the filmmakers wanted us to get incredibly emotionally invested in the climax of the story, well, then they need to do the work leading up to the point, as opposed to having this overall kind of pervasive, silly tone. And that's another one of my big problems with the movie. It's just silly without being funny, where it's kind of goofy and it's kind of quirky, but it's not witty. And anytime a movie gets too silly or goofy without actually being funny, it ventures into the realm of just becoming stupid. And so, yeah, I guess oftentimes I found this movie to be as stupid in some scenes as I found it to be kind of charming and insightful in others. Because oftentimes the style of comedy in this movie, or the sense of humor in this movie, it ventures into a realm that I would describe as office funny as opposed to actually funny. And what do I mean by that? Like, imagine you're working in a very kind of boring, safe, predictable corporate environment. There's always that one guy who's kind of like the wisecracker at the office, who's a little bit more silly than the rest of the office, and he's always got everybody cracking up at his stupid jokes because he's just a little bit more funny than the rest of the environment, but he's not like funny enough to be like a stand-up comedian and go on stage and actually make people laugh for real. And oftentimes I feel like with this movie, it's a little bit like Gore Verbinski has spent so much time making bland, interchangeable Disney movies with no flavor or taste of any kind, that anything that has like a little bit of flavor or a little bit of taste seems much more exciting than all those Pirates of the Caribbean movies or Lone Rangers movies that he'd been making for Disney. So once again, good luck, have fun, don't die. Oftentimes it's office funny, but not really funny. A little bit like when somebody is office hot as opposed to actually hot. Like if you're actually hot, you can go off and be a model. But if you're office hot, you're just the hottest person that works in the office. So this movie sometimes it's office hot instead of actually hot.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You're in for a really weird night.
So let me call attention to some of the good qualities, because I feel like I've gotten the majority of my my grievances with the movie out of my system. So let's start with Haley Lou Richardson, who I first saw in season 2 of The White Lotus. She's fantastic in this movie. I thought she was great in season 2 of The White Lotus, and I hope that this movie will be the harbinger of things to come, because very pretty girl, very talented, but she's got a lot of raw emotion, and she can be hilariously funny when she wants to be. So yeah, I think you can make a case that she actually has the best performance in this movie, and that is hard to do when you're competing alongside Sam Rockwell, because Sam Rockwell, he is a serious pro, a serious veteran at this point. I like Sam Rockwell in this. However, there were some scenes where I felt like, you know what, this reminds me of Terry Gilliam on a bad day when he was making movies like The Adventures of Baron Munchausen as opposed to movies like Time Bandits or Brazil. But because I've talked a lot of shit about this movie, I'm feeling a little bit guilty, and I feel like I should call attention to 2 individual scenes or individual sequences that I think are worthy of some of the best satire that I've seen in a show like Black Mirror, back during its heyday when Black Mirror was really good. So let's start with the high school sequence where we have Michael Pena and Zazie Beetz. One's a permanent teacher, one's a substitute teacher, and they're basically dealing with, it's basically like a sequence about the trials and tribulations of being a teacher during an era where all the kids are complete and total hostile and or mindless zombies, totally obsessed with their phones, staring at their phones in class. And then, once again, we're in the spoiler section, so if you don't want any spoilers, bail out now. But Michael Pena, he's walking around his class at one point and looking over the shoulder of his students and just seeing what they're doing. And there's one girl who's tapping on a million things and scrolling through a million videos, and she's just like, just doom scrolling until the end of time, but then suddenly stops in the middle and just goes, "Fuck you, bitch, I hope you fucking die, blah, 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 blah." And then she goes back to like putting hearts and like, stars and all this crap. And it was so well timed and so well executed. I was like, yeah, that is how a lot of people are. They're sitting around scrolling through an infinite river of videos and content and periodically stopping and interrupting the doom scrolling in order to talk mad shit and wish death upon people. But just seeing Michael Pena in his class, he's trying to teach the novel Anna Karenina to a room full of kids who are illiterate and don't want to read, and they're like, "Oh my God, that book sounds really old," or "Has there ever been a movie made? Oh, the movie's so old. It's like an old Keira Knightley movie." Like, these are kids who completely, totally live in the present, have zero attention span. They don't care about movies, books, anything like that. And just watching Michael Pena's frustration as he's trying to convince these kids to at least learn how to read a complete sentence. Like, there will be some people who accuse this movie of being kind of, sound like, okay, boomer, like stop complaining about the youth of this world. But then over the course of the movie, we see how these kids are coming under the influence of this horrible AI. And this AI basically makes them act like mindless zombies, like something out of a George A. Romero zombie film. And so that whole high school sequence did have me chuckling at the expense of all the kids in the movie. But easily the most memorable chapter of the movie is dealing with the character played by Juno Temple, who plays a character named Susan. And this sequence, it's genuinely disturbing. There's some real trauma there. There's some real heartache there. So then when it ventures into the realm of dark comedy, the dark comedy is that much more disturbing and hilarious because the subject matter is just so fucking horrible. Because within the context of this chapter, this flashback of Juno Temple's character, it deals with grieving parents who have lost their children to school shootings. But not only have they lost their children to school shootings, in some cases, they've lost the same child over and over and over again, because in this dystopian sci-fi environment, rather than dealing with the causes of school shootings, instead, parents are encouraged by this new service to use the DNA of their kids to clone their kids and get them back. However, the kids aren't quite as good as they were before. Like, you basically pick out a few characteristics to try to make them as much like your child as possible. However, they're basically like an AI automaton who kind of sort of acts like your kid, but periodically would just start spouting out ads. You actually have AI children with ads for like iced tea and shit like that. but there's one scene where the character played by Juno Temple goes to this party where you have a bunch of other grieving parents, and she meets this one couple where they have cloned the same child 3 or 4 times over, and they're so traumatized and they're so racked with just like horror of what's happened to their kid, they've started experimenting with the features on their child, like making the child obnoxiously tall or making the child a Muslim even though they're not Muslims, and they're just cracking up. But you can tell the parents are just on the verge of breaking into like hysterical screaming, but instead the way they deal with their trauma is basically by playing gags on their AI resurrected kid over and over and over again. It was truly disturbing, truly profound, and it's the kind of dark comedy that I genuinely, sincerely love. But I think at this point I'm running the risk of repeating myself. There's some ingredients that I liked, there's some ingredients that I didn't like, but overall, I'm glad this movie exists. It's an original movie with a lot of big creative swings. And toward the end of the movie, those swings get bigger and bigger. Like, oh, that didn't work at all. Oh, that was actually really cool. But Gore Verbinski, earlier in his career, the most successful part of his career, you could argue that he wasn't taking any big swings. He was providing precisely the roller coaster experiences that Disney wants their directors to supply. And that's why at one point, he was arguably one of the most successful directors in the world. Because if you look at his IMDb page, from 2003 basically through 2011, he was a reliable studio filmmaker where he made Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, followed by Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, and then eventually Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. And he made all 3 of those movies within 4 years of each other. That's a hell of a lot of Disney content. And those movies were insanely successful. I never got on board with the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, but obviously there was a giant audience that was just eating it with a spoon every single time. But even when he would take a break from making these big franchise movies and try to do something a little bit more personal, a movie like The Weatherman in 2005 or A Cure for Wellness in 2016, I was never really able to get on the wavelength of any of Gore Verbinski's movies. I always say that basically if movies are like a wavelength, it was a wavelength that I was incapable of seeing or hearing, where the movies just kind of exist in this vacuum where I don't like them, I don't dislike them. Like usually with any movie that I watch, I either fucking love them or I hate them. But with Gore Verbinski, I would say that for the majority of his career, I've been completely and totally indifferent, where the movies, they might as well not even exist. They don't upset me, they don't thrill me. I'm just like, he's just off doing his own thing. The one exception would be his remake of The Ring in 2002. The first time I saw The Ring, I had not yet seen the original Japanese film that it was based on, Ringu. So this was my first encounter with The Ring. And I thought it was a pretty good movie until we got to the very end. I was like, oh, the movie's over. Like, what is everybody so excited about? And then that final scene started and I was just like, oh my God, that's the most crazy fucking hardcore horrifying shit I've ever seen. So that was the one time Gore Verbinski really had a massive impact on me. So I would argue that Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die is my favorite movie by Gore Verbinski since The Ring. Everything else in between, like A Cure for Wellness, I turned that thing off like halfway through. I was bored out of my mind. The Weatherman, I was like, what is this crap? Like, who is this made for? I think it was made for Gore Verbinski, but it's a weird thing where he's one of the most successful directors who's ever lived. However, he does have some massive flops to his name. The big reason that it's been 10 years since he released his last movie is The Lone Ranger lost a ton of money for Disney. Then he switched gears and tried to make a personal movie, A Cure for Wellness, and he made that for like $40 million, but A Cure for Wellness also bombed. And usually if you make 2 or 3 bombs in a row, but then it's very tough to get hired. But I was reading an interview with him earlier where he was trying to explain why there's been a 10-year interim between his last movie and now. It's not for lack of trying, but during the last 10 years, blockbuster movies have gotten increasingly expensive. And as the blockbuster movies become increasingly expensive to make, that makes the studios behind them increasingly risk-averse, which means if you're not willing to make a franchise movie for them or a franchise extension, a requel, a prequel, a sequel, whatever the case might be, they're really not that interested in working with you. And so high five to Gore Verbinski, where he's at a point in his career where he wants to make original movies. He wants to stop working on all the brain dead nonsense that basically Disney cranks out on an assembly line on a regular basis. And it is my genuine, sincere hope that this movie finds its audience during its opening weekend. They made the movie for only $10 million. It doesn't need to do that well to justify being made. And the company who made it, Briarcliff, I'm not all that familiar with them as a production company or as a distributor, but so far, I've seen a lot of encouraging feedback online. It seems like that at a minimum, there's a small, passionate following that's been really looking forward to this movie, that's very fired up for this movie. And if my audience last night is any indication, there are going to be some people out there who just fucking love this movie. And I hope they tell their friends. I hope they take their siblings. I hope they take their loved ones. I hope all those people that are excited for it go to see it. Because like I said at the beginning of the video, if this movie is successful, we can look forward to more original R-rated movies made by blockbuster directors in the future. But with that, I think it's time to wrap up this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and I'll be back at you tomorrow with my review for Wuthering Heights, starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. And I have a feeling if Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die does not do well, it'll be because everybody's going to see Wuthering Heights instead of this, but hopefully there's room in the marketplace for both movies to find the audience that they deserve. Hope you all have a great weekend at the movies, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.